3, 2, 1. And 3, 2, 1. Hello everybody, Timothy here, and I am very excited to start talking about Eternal Masters, a set that's coming out 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks. I will personally be drafting it the Friday it comes out, but I don't really know how many times I'm going to be able to draft it, or honestly how many times my store is going to be able to draft it. But I'm very excited, and say what you want about the value and whether or not you're disappointed or super excited about your boxes. I'm looking at this from the perspective of draft only. So I had a lot of ideas for videos to get us started with Eternal Masters, but I figured I would start with the videos that would help me the most and hopefully help other people out when it comes to drafting the set. When your prize packs include Eternal Masters and the possibility of cards like Karakas and Mana Crypt and Force of Will, you really want to do your best and win some prize packs. So what I thought I would do is I would break down 5 different videos, and in each video I would go over 2 of the dual color archetypes. Much like Modern Masters, this set seems to be split into 2 color archetypes. And while you don't necessarily have to draft those cards, there is a lot of synergy to be had between 2 colors in a given archetype. For instance, like I can draft blue-red, and I can just take the best blue cards and the best red cards and put them together, and I'll probably win a good percentage of my games, but I'll probably win more if I draft a blue-red deck that's on theme, where the cards supplement each other and work with each other well. So I'm going to kick things off with blue-red, and then I'll be looking at black-green in this video, and we'll do 2 at a time until I've covered all of them. I obviously haven't drafted this set yet, so I'm no expert, so I'm absolutely 100% looking for comments, looking for conversation. Tell me what I missed, tell me what I'm saying that doesn't seem to make sense, and tell me what I should be looking out for myself. This is just here to kind of give tips to people who may be weary about Eternal Masters, and at the same time to help myself out with my brain process, get me thinking about draft and how I'm going to approach it. So let's kick it off with, is it blue-red? For each of these archetypes, I'm going to start by telling you what the archetype is based around and what the staples for that archetype are. For blue-red, the archetype seems to be basically just casting spells, specifically spells from the graveyard. So you'll see a lot of retrace and a lot of flashback in this set. And while flashback is covered in a lot of other colors too, I think retrace is exclusively blue-red in this set. I could be wrong about that, but flashback does cover almost all the colors. I'm not sure if there are any black flashback spells, but there are definitely white and green ones. At any rate, the archetype staples you're looking at here, first off we have Burning Vengeance. This is a card I believe from Innistrad. I know it's somewhere in that block. It might have been Dark Ascension, and I never got to play with the card, but I've heard good things about it, and honestly, I think it's a fantastic build around if you're able to get a lot of flashback spells. Obviously, it's meant to work with flashback, but it's really neat that it also works with retrace. Whenever you cast a spell from your graveyard, you get to shock something, a player or a creature. This is the type of build-around card that costs enough that you can take a turn off to play it, and then really take advantage of it if your deck's built to abuse it. I'm looking forward to drafting it. I think it's a fantastic card if you get the pieces to make it go together, but it's also a perfect example of synergy. You wouldn't put this in every red deck. In fact, if you don't have any recursion spells from your graveyard, you're not going to cast it at all, right? But Burning Vengeance is on my list of archetype staples here, mostly for the retrace and flashback cards. Young Pyromancer and Wee Dragonauts are more focused on the archetype as a whole, where casting spells gives you some sort of reward. It basically turns it into extra damage. Young Pyromancer found its way in Legacy, and the foils of this card are ridiculously priced, but it's just one of the best ways to turn a bunch of spells into a pile of damage. And while, you know, you get to take a couple turns off, they're 1/1s, etc., every time you cast a spell, you're getting a 1/1, which is essentially, against certain decks, 1 damage off of every spell you cast, or additional damage if those elementals live to fight another day. It also does some neat things with instants where you can make blockers and defend yourself, but you really want to be using Young Pyromancer as an aggressive card to push in extra quote-unquote burn damage with the elemental tokens. And We Dragonauts is very similar. It's kind of a Kiln Fiend type card where you want to load up on a bunch of spells and just turn that into damage there too. We Dragonauts also having flying is pretty nice. And Dragonauts is a good introduction to our multicolor cards, because often in these archetypal builds like Modern Masters and here Eternal Masters, you see that the gold cards kind of indicate what the colors are supposed to be doing. We saw this in Magic Origins as well, where there was a single gold color or gold card for each color combination, and it gave a hint at what the archetype was supposed to be. Moving right along, what else do you want to prioritize? There are staples, of course. They're the cards that kind of make your deck win, but these are the cards that you want to fill in the rest of the deck with, mostly commons and uncommons. So obviously flashback and retrace effects. Like I said, retrace is pretty much red-blue, but flashback is in a bunch of other colors too, so there's some flexibility. You get cards like Firebolt, cards like Faithless Ludin, simple flashback cards that basically give you, an extra card in your hand. When you have a card sitting in your graveyard with flashback, it's very similar to having an extra card in your hand. Very nice added effect. And even though the effects are small, they build up over time, and you can win a game, especially if you're using Burn and Vengeance. Retrace is not something I've ever had experience playing outside of the card Raven's Crime, which I believe was in the first Modern Masters, but you get these very, very weak effects like deal a damage or draw a card for very small amounts of mana, but later on in the game you can discard a card and, essentially flash back the card. You get to do the effect again. Cards like Flame Jab and I don't even know the names of the other retrace cards. They're very minor effects, but they let you do something with your lands later, and they give you this added bonus to playing a spell-based deck. As far as creatures go, typical red-blue decks don't play a lot of creatures, so the creatures they do play need to have some sort of impact. You're going to want to play, some sort of finisher, but the main nuts and bolts of your deck are going to be little tempo-based cards like Sting Scourger and Mana War, these bounce spells on a stick that also leave behind bodies and let you kind of attack for small amounts of damage. Red-blue uses incremental advantage and tempo to kind of push in a game. And honestly, Mana War is just a fantastic card in general, so any card that looks like Mana War or does that kind of effect is probably also worth looking into. So here you're looking for repeatable spells and small little tempo creatures to fill out your deck. The last thing I'll talk about for each color combination are the rares that you want to be looking out for. Little caveat there before I get into it. This is Eternal Masters. People are going to be opening absolutely ridiculous overpriced cards, and people will be value drafting for the most part. So it's not uncommon to say you'll get certain rares, and it's not uncommon to say that you'll be passed certain cards that wouldn't be passed in a normal draft simply because of the value of certain packs. So here you have cards like Call the Skybreaker. Maybe not a great example to start off with, but it's not a particularly great card. It was actually one of the cards I was super disappointed to see in this set, simply because it's worth like 10 cents. But keeping all value aside, it can be an absolutely insane finisher for blue-red. Like I said, blue-red is going to need some way to actually win. It's going to need a finisher. Sometimes those tempo creatures aren't enough to get you in. And a retraceable threat of a 5/5 for 7 mana and a land is a pretty big deal. At some point, your opponent's going to be overwhelmed if you just cast this card over and over again. Isochron Scepter is pretty neat. If you've ever played against this card, it's super, super annoying depending on what they happen to imprint on it. I also should mention that I'm thinking about doing a video of top 5 combos that you can do in Eternal Masters, and Isochron Scepter is definitely a combo piece. Think about cards like Counterspell, or I don't know. Isn't that a great example by itself, right? But one neat thing about Isochron Scepter that works really well with Young Pyromancer and We Dragonauts is that the activated ability actually casts the copy, so you do get to activate those cast-triggered abilities. Mystical Tutor, another card that you might not get past a lot, but it's not unlikely that you would take it, and it's not unlikely that it won't be passed either. But it's basically an instant that searches for another instant or sorcery, exactly the type of card you want in these decks. Essentially a cantrip that triggers your Pyromancers and Wee Dragonauts and searches for, a certain toolbox of effect. You can go grab a counter spell, or you can go grab a draw spell or a removal spell. Very, very versatile card, and probably a card that any blue deck would be willing to play, not just a spell-based deck. And then finally, kind of a pet card of mine from EDH is Dualcaster Mage. Not a particularly strong card, and it's the type of card where you want to hold it up with something else, because if you're just passing the turn and trying to be cute with it, it's not going to get there. But if you're playing a lot of spells and you have just a ton of instants and sorceries in your deck, then Dualcaster Mage goes very nicely. You can copy your own cards, essentially fork them while adding 2 power to the board. And Dualcaster Mage has the added ability that you can copy your opponent's spells. Whenever they cast something, you don't negate it, you don't counter it, but you do get to cast a copy of theirs. So if they're casting a draw spell, why not Dualcaster Mage and get a draw spell yourself? At any rate, these are the rares that stuck out to me to fill in the archetype. You'll notice there's not really anything busted here, and I did leave Dak Faden off the list because I don't think it really supports the spell archetype very much, even though you're probably going to play it in all of your blue-red decks, if we're being completely honest. But yeah, blue-red, very typical build, very similar to what you see in Shadows over Innistrad, where you want to cast a lot of spells and you want your creatures to be triggering off of those spells, and the few creatures you do play, or the lower creatures on your curve, or the creatures that do fill in the gaps on your deck, they benefit from you casting lots of instants and sorceries. So very similar here. Moving on, I'll be talking about everyone's favorite, black-green elves. So we actually just did this in Origins with the same color combination for elves, and in fact, there are a couple Origins reprints here, like the totally vintage playable Shaman of the Pack, right? At any rate, I wasn't super excited about elves in Origins, but elves looks pretty sweet in Eternal Masters. I'm not too big on drafting tribal because it doesn't work out sometimes. You get cut and then your deck's just terrible. But I think there's enough to go around here and make it really work. I will say here, this is a little bit different from blue-red, where blue-red you can kind of scrap together a deck with what's being drafted. But once you go elves, if you get cut off, it really hurts. Your elves need other elves to support them. Imagine a card like Elvish Vanguard here, that you pick it up and then you pick up maybe 1 or 2 other elves, and then you just get cut off the elves. Your cards really need to synergize together in green-black here. So the staples that you're looking for, something like Shaman of the Pack, something to end the game or take advantage of actually having tons of elves. The same goes for Elvish Vanguard, something that can trigger repetitively or get some big huge hit off of using all of these elves. And then in the middle, Llanowar elves, you want to be rampant, of course. You want to use your little mana dorks to flood the board, or to take some sort of advantage and get some bigger things out on the board a couple turns earlier. Typical elf stuff. Play a lot of elves and then have some huge payoff for it, right? What you want to prioritize, basically, I don't know how else to say it, you want elves, right? I mean, we're just being point blank there. It's a tribal deck. That's what you're looking for, elves to fill out your deck. The more you get, the better your deck is. Every elf you add to your elf deck will make the rest of your cards significantly better. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about synergy. A card like Wirewood Symbiote is not a card you would ever play in just an ordinary green deck, but it is a card you're actively looking for when you're playing an elf deck, right? When I did my Shadows over Innistrad draft tips, one thing I mentioned is that you want the payoff cards before you take the enablers, and I think that's true here too. I'm never going to take Wirewood Symbiote before I have some sort of elf shenanigans to use with it. I would still take Blight Soil Druid. It's a solid card, but I'd be much happier if I knew that I had black-green elves going for me. On the flip side, if I have Lysolana Huntmaster or Scarblade or Timberwatch Elf, then I'm actively looking for the enablers to make those cards better. This is also the type of archetype where you can usually tell when it's open in a draft and when it's okay to move into it. Something like the Huntmaster is a card that you would play in a couple green decks. It is a hill giant. It's not particularly impressive in just a solid green deck, but it can be a curve filler. On the other side, Timberwatch Elf and Lisalana Scarblade are the type of cards that if you see them mid to late in a pack, it's probably a good sign that that specific color of elves is open, specifically Scarblade. A very good payoff card for playing elves, but one that nobody wants in a normal black deck, so seeing that late in a pack means it's probably okay to ship into elves and try to draft from there. So yeah, what you want to prioritize in your elf deck, enablers, payoff cards, but my advice stays the same. Take the payoff cards first, and then look to get the enablers. The rares you're looking for here, well, they did a pretty good job of balancing it. One thing I like about black-green elves here is that while the rares are good, you can probably build a solid elf deck with just commons and uncommons. You don't need a huge payoff card like one of these guys here to really make it work out. There's actually quite a bit of strength in the commons alone and a couple of the uncommons to make it work out and be able to win a game. Obviously, Deathrite Shaman is probably, I don't know, the best elf ever printed? What is your opinion? What's the best elf ever printed? I'm leaning towards Deathrite Shaman as one of them. I will admit Deathrite Shaman's not as busted in Limited as it is in Legacy, but it is still a very solid card, and those second two abilities do quite a bit of damage over the course of a game, or gain you quite a bit of life over the course of the game. That mana ability doesn't come up as often as it does in Legacy, but it's still there, and it's a nice little ability to have. It does provide mana fixing. I would not ever expect to be past a Deathrite Shaman, since it is in two very versatile colors. It fits into a lot of decks, and it does a lot of things for a one-drop. There is a reason it's banned in Modern. The next two elf payoff rares here are kind of stark contrasts to each other. First off is Heritage Druid, and this is a prime example of a green card that you're not just going to play in any green deck. So like I said, sometimes you'll take the best green card and the best black card, and you'll scrap together a deck that wins sometimes. But Heritage Druid is not the type of card you would put in that sort of deck. On the other hand, when you have a synergy-based deck and you're going for black-green elves, Heritage Druid does a lot more work. So, unfortunately, Heritage Druid has a pretty nice price tag on him, so I wouldn't expect to see a lot of them get passed around. But if you have Heritage Druid in your green deck, you're probably a very, very happy person. It can just ramp out some pretty insane things. Actually get you like a 6 or 7 drop on turn 3, depending on what other things you've played by that turn. Imperious Perfect is kind of the opposite, where it's just a solid card on its own without its typing. It does get better in elf decks. It does make your other elves better, but it's such a good card on its own that most green decks would play it. Imperious Perfect is not a sign that elves are open, but rather a sign that green as a whole is open. So the card's absolutely bonkers, very strong. I would take it anytime I saw it, to be honest, if I was playing green. So very, very stark contrast to Heritage Druid as far as the two rare elves go here, or the two monocolored elves, I should say. And then the last thing I mentioned here on the side, you've got Regal Force and Sylvos Rogue Elemental. These are just big green fatties, with Regal Force probably being a better card in general, because it lets you draw 10 million cards in an elf deck, and Sylvos being an extremely viable threat, a very strong threat if you could ramp it out early. Imagine turn 4 Sylvos. What is your opponent going to do about it, right? Swords to Plowshares? Hope they have one. But these are very strong cards. Green does best at getting these fatties out quick, and Elves does it better than any other green deck. So if you're taking all the mana dorks, or you really have that Heritage Druid working out for you, I would look to find some huge game ender like this that you can ramp out early and really crush your opponent with. These green cards, you know, they fit in most green decks, and they're the type of stompy cards that you're going to put in pretty much all of your green decks, but they are actually at their peak when you can ramp them out earlier, which means I think they're the better picks for elf decks than they are for something like green-red or green-blue or something like that. So that's Izzet and Golgari. That's blue-red and black-green. I know I'm stumbling over my thoughts a little bit, but I'm pretty excited about this set. And there's a lot more to say about these archetypes. Obviously, I didn't go through every single card in the archetype, but the point is to just kind of pinpoint the cards that you want to be on the lookout for when you're drafting an archetype. My honest advice is that when you go into Eternal Masters and you're drafting, look to draft an archetype. Don't look to just play 5-color good stuff like Modern Masters 2, because sometimes you will trip up on the mana because you're holding a white card and you have the 4 other colors on the field. Trust me, been there, done that. So try and stick to an archetype. See what's open and use the tips that I'm putting here. Use the cards that I'm pointing out to your advantage and try to build a consistent synergistic deck where the individual cards actually boost the power level of the other cards in your deck. I think that that's the best way to approach a synergy-based format. At any rate, thank you for watching. Thank you for watching me stumble over my words a billion times. I always appreciate your watches. I always appreciate your likes, comments, and subscribes. And next up, I'll be doing Boros and Simic. So, excuse me. So, white, red, and blue, green up next. Two very different combination of colors from what we've already seen in this video. As always, thank you for watching. Like, comments, and subscribe. This is Timothy, and I will see you next time.